Mr Ewing is making a statement on many of these issues to Parliament tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll have more to say in that respect.
Thank you. That ends the statement on the Smith Commission report. The next item of business is a further statement, this time by Richard Lockhead, on the Agricultural Holdings Review Group report. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and there should therefore be no interventions or interruptions. I call on Richard Lockhead, Cabinet Secretary, about 10 minutes.
Presiding Officer, we need vibrant agriculture in Scotland, as we all know, to support our rural economy, to put food on our tables and to deliver a range of benefits for wider society. We are, however, a lucky nation in that we have land to ensure food security, and we have men and women with the skills to work our land, many of whom have rented the land to grow the food and to deliver these other benefits. And, of course, we have landlords who are willing to let out land for those purposes. So tenant farming continues to play a vital role in our country. And generations of tenant farmers, often representing the same family and the same land, have worked hard and contributed to our country's success. Scotland's total agricultural area represents 79% of Scotland, and tenanted land makes up around a quarter of that, making it a crucial part of Scottish agriculture. But tenant farming, like every other sector, has to cope with change and challenges. And since 1982, there has been a 42% decrease in tenanted land in this country, and we now have one of the lowest proportions of tenanted land anywhere in Europe. Given that securing a tenancy is often the gateway to a career in farming, we are in danger of closing the door on future generations unless we act. One of the big challenges we face is our ageing farming population, for instance. 57% of occupiers of farm businesses are currently over the age of 55. So to ensure that tenant farming thrives in the 21st century, steps must be taken to protect this sector's vital role. But despite the progress of previous reforms to agricultural holdings legislation back in 2003 and then subsequent legislation brought in by this government, there is still a continuing decline in tenanted lands. So that is why, at the Royal Highland Show in 2013, I announced a fundamental review of agricultural holdings to come up with solutions to reverse this decline. So today I am announcing the outcome of the review. Now, this was a very challenging remit, and it was very essential to get the right people for the job. Sir Crispin Agnew, Barbara Brown, Hamish Lean, Ian Mackay, Jeff Maxwell and Andrew Thinn brought their talents, expertise, passion and enthusiasm to the table, and I really couldn't have asked for a better team. From the beginning, the review group were clear that we needed to talk to people on the ground and bring the industry with us. And since the initial call for evidence in February 2014, the review group has held 78 meetings across Scotland, and the group are very grateful to all those who made time to share their views and experiences as the group travelled from Bute to Blair Athol and, of course, many places in between as well, and enjoying all the home baking and cups of tea round the tables in farmhouses at the same time, of course. So we benefited from hearing first-hand of the problems and issues facing the sector, such as the aspiring new entrant who can't get a tenancy to provide a secure base for his business and young family, or the tenant who wants to retire but can't until he has resolved a standoff with his landlord over wage compensation. But there were very many strong signs of success and innovation too, such as a young tenant and his landlord overcoming initial concerns and barriers to increase the holding and secure significant funding to grow the dairy business. And to back up what we heard, robust research was also carried out, as well as wide-ranging surveys of the sector. And last June, we reflected on what we had heard and published our interim report, setting out our vision and how we plan to develop our recommendations. Since then, we have developed our thinking, undertaking 12 public meetings across Scotland. So today, we are now publishing the final report of the Agricultural Holdings Legislative Review Group. And this significant package of 49 recommendations has the potential to be a turning point for the tenanted sector in Scotland and to secure a very vibrant future for those working in the sector. It's bold, it's radical. The recommendations aim to get to the heart of the matter and address the three underlying issues affecting the sector that we decided were the key issues as a group. Firstly, the need for stronger, more productive relationships. Secondly, the need to address the right to buy debate. And finally, they need to provide opportunities for new entrants and a framework for the sector that's fit for the 21st century. Strong relationships are the foundations on which success is built. Relationships with the land, the community, and most fundamentally between tenant and landlords. Around 82% of tenant farmers report having a good relationship with their landlords, and 89% of landlords agree. So that does show that much of the sector is working. But others describe relationships as poor, sometimes very poor or non-existent, highlighting there are still many issues to be addressed. Now, I don't believe these issues are insurmountable. The solutions will require effort and compromise from both sides, and we have seen great examples of this already. In fact, one of the success stories of the last year or so was the process which saw the facilitation of the industry-led rent review initiative, highlighting that the power to resolve relationship issues often lies as much with the sector as it does with the government or legislation. However, the Review Group's recommendations are aimed at ensuring a strong role for the Scottish Government in working with the industry to promote better relationships. For example, by providing better support, guidance and oversight of the sector through the establishment of a tenant farming commissioner and robust codes of practice. And also by designing a clearer, fairer process for setting rents based on the productive capacity of a holding that will minimise disputes. And as I made clear when I announced this review, it's not possible to have a meaningful discussion on the future of this sector without addressing the issue of right to buy. Over the past 18 months, this review has facilitated an honest and frank debate that's helped to identify the reasons behind calls for an absolute right to buy. Now, the group identified a loss of confidence in the system, concern over the lack of investment by landowners and the inability of tenants to realise their own, often substantial investments, and a general feeling of imbalance in the rights and responsibilities of 1991 Act tenants and landlords. We identified these as the key underlying issues. And of the report's 49 recommendations, the majority are aimed at addressing these underlying issues, such as the widening of succession rights to secure a future for 1991 secure tenancies. However, it is clear there are some cases where tenants feel relationships have deteriorated to a point of no return, and that a right to buy is the only solution and is in the public interest. The report therefore proposes a range of measures to enhance the right to buy, including strengthening the preemptive right to buy by removing the requirement to register, enabling 1991 Act tenants where a landlord does not meet their obligations to apply to the Scottish Land Court to force the sale of the holding, and also further consideration of how any proposals taken forward in the Land Reform Bill could assist in addressing issues faced by tenant farming communities. So these radical proposals have the potential to provide tenants with a solution to escape the clutches of bad landlords, but for the vast majority of landlords who have good relationships with their tenants, these radical proposals pose no threat. Life, like tenant farming, is built on mature compromise and by focusing on the path ahead. We all need to look forward to the many opportunities that lie ahead and ensure the tenanted sector is fit for purpose in the 21st century. The group are determined that tenant farming should play an important role in providing routes for new entrants, security and flexibility for established businesses, and a dignified exit for older farmers. The Review Group's vision for letting vehicles and a legislative framework fit for this century will help make the changes needed to make the most of the opportunities that do lie ahead. The recommendations are intended to provide greater flexibility, more innovation, more investment, more land and better security by, for instance, providing for the conversion of 1991 Act tenancies into a 35-year limited duration tenancy to be assigned in the open market, and also by replacing the short limited duration tenancies and the LDTs as well with a new modernised assignable limited duration tenancy with a minimum term of 10 years. The group has also proposed innovative and groundbreaking tenancy apprenticeships through share farming to help remove barriers faced by new entrants when trying to access land. Also, for those with some capital but lacking land, the report proposes potential new vehicles to enable tenants to take a greater share of fixed equipment and repair and maintenance obligations in return for a minimum 35-year term and rents based on productive capacity. So these proposals have the potential to be game-changing and to deliver greater, much-needed equality and diversity within the sector. So as I close my opening remarks, can I just say that for some things to improve, people need to accept change and adapt to today's environment. I know that's not always easy, but it's essential for the tenant farming community to use the recommendations to make a real change to their lives and to their communities. I'm confident this landmark report does indeed represent a turning point for the sector. We need a strong, vibrant, flexible sector where tradition and experience are respected, where new ideas and new investment are encouraged, where farming businesses are built on the principles of shared endeavour for mutual gain, and where landlords and tenants respect and value the contribution that both can bring. In this, the Burn Supper season, we remind ourselves our national bard was an 18th century tenant farmer. Maybe not all landlords and tenants shall brothers be for all that, but we must work together to ensure this sector thrives in the 21st century, and I commend this report to Parliament.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in the statement. I intend to allow around about 20 minutes for this item. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary were to press the request to speak button now. And I call Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for sight of the statement and the final report, which is not always the case with reports in reasonably timely fashion. I would also like to thank the review group and all those who took part, because without them this could not have happened and we couldn't be where we are today. This, as the Cabinet Secretary has highlighted, is a landmark report and must herald a new era in agricultural Scotland, bringing opportunities for the range of tenants and new tenants and security in retirement. The final key aspiration of the interim report states that underlying culture will be forward-looking and based on shared endeavour, mutual respect and partnership between owners and tenants. Can the Cabinet Secretary specifically identify ways in which the final report recommendations will contribute to this culture of partnership, and how the balance between confidence in the system asked for by the landowners and the protection of tenants' rights in a vibrant tenanted sector will be achieved? I welcome the enhanced measures for right to buy, recognising that there can be breakdown in relationships, while also acknowledging that many of the relationships are good. Can the Cabinet Secretary also explain in more detail how the Tenant Farming Commissioner will be appointed and what the functions will be, and how the Code of Practice will be developed and who will be part of making that Code of Practice real so that everyone can move forward together? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Claudia Beamish for the spirit of her remarks, and I do agree, and also have said that I do believe this could herald a new era for tenant farming in Scotland. It will of course require landlords, tenants, all the other players in the sector to get behind the report and also keep our eye on the ball of wanting a vibrant tenanted sector in Scotland and food security and all the other benefits that working the land brings for our country. And I believe we all share that aspiration. I believe it will help get us there because of some of the radical proposals in the report that will promote security of tenure for tenant farmers, but also recognises the shared responsibility and obligations both for landlords and tenants, and indeed everyone else involved in the process of setting rents or the other aspects of daily life in the tenancy sector. It will also promote keeping land in Scotland in the tenancy sector, because if aspiring entrants do not have access to the first rung of the ladder of a farming career, which is land, then simply we will not be able to attract new blood into agricultural Scotland. So I think clearly that's a fundamental aim of the report's recommendation. You asked many questions in terms of the Tenant Farming Commissioner. Of course, we will bring forward further proposals in due course, having taken the report and its recommendations today. In terms of how to establish the Tenant Farming Commissioner, there are some codes of practice already in existence. There may be a requirement for more. These discussions will take place between the Scottish Government and all our stakeholders. But we will move as quickly as we can on these recommendations. We recognise we have to do that. So a lot of work still lies ahead, but we believe here there's many signposts in here and radical recommendations that will deliver a much better future for the sector in Scotland.
Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I just draw members' attention to my entry in the Register of Interests, which will show that I own land that is let under an SLDT, one of the 82% of mutually happy arrangements, I'm glad to be able to report. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advanced sight of his statement? Clearly, there's a lot of detail still to be scrutinised, but on first sight, we welcome many of the suggestions and proposals that are put forward. But can I ask, is the Cabinet Secretary finally ruling out an absolute right to buy, as recommended in paragraph 24 of the report? Can I also ask, given that tenants are to be given a preemptive right to buy without the need to register, will landowners be given a similar right over assignations that then subsequently come onto the open market? And can the Cabinet Secretary finally tell us how he believes these reforms will actually increase the amount of land that comes onto the market and is available to let, which is what we need if we are to truly reinvigorate this sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said in my own remarks, we could not divorce the many issues around the debate over right to buy from this particular review. And while there's a land reform debate going on in Scotland at the moment, and there's a consultation open, and of course the review group refers to that in terms of some of the routes where there may be a case for the tenant to buy the farm, we have made our position very, very clear in the review group. That we want to keep land in tenancy in Scotland because that is the only way in which many people will enter agriculture. But there are some situations in this country, unfortunately, where there may be no option but to allow the sitting tenant the option of purchasing their farm under the right to buy. We have laid out there are two clear routes for that happening in the report. Firstly, we are introducing the proposal that a tenant can go to the land court and force a sale where the landlord is not meeting their obligations. And secondly, the other very clear route, which is under the current land reform proposals, the power for ministers to intervene where sustainable development is not being promoted is being proposed, and therefore that could provide another option for tenant farming communities in this country. So I think it's very clear the message from the report. I think it would be good if we could all rally behind that and move forward, and that delivers justice for tenant farmers as well as the wider sector.
Rob Gibson, followed by David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement. The review group recognised that around a fifth of tenant farmers exist in what could be called a Victorian landlord and tenant relationship. My tenant farmers and my constituency and many others will be pleased that a preemptive right to buy can be triggered. The Cabinet Secretary uses the phrase in his statement where 1991 Act tenants can force a sale of their holding. And the phrase is where a landlord does not meet his obligations. Can he expand on the details of these landlord obligations?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly that is one of the more radical proposals within the report, and I think it will be warmly welcomed because it's reasonable, it's proportionate, and it's in the public interest. In terms of the obligations on landlords, well, clearly, as the legislation is framed and as we move forward, a lot more detail will come forward for the committees to consider, and indeed we'll have to work with our stakeholders to frame the legislation at the same time. However, we have come across examples in this country where there's been a lack of investment. There are also occasions where the landlord takes very little of any interest in their tenancies, and I have some situations in my own constituency that I just can't quite believe. So in terms of the actual obligations, of course, we'll have to look at that and drop the legislation in an appropriate manner in due course. But I think anyone who's reasonable, who knows anything about this issue, knows that there are circumstances, unfortunately, in this country where the landlord has not fulfilled their obligations, and therefore it's in the public interest that this Parliament, this Government, look for solutions for those particular cases.
David Stewart, followed by Dave Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What assessment has the Cabinet Secretary made of limited duration tenancies? Will they create more security for tenant farmers, and will they get round the problems identified in the Supreme Court case of Salveson versus Riddle?
Excuse me, can I just say that I would prefer that we have no references at all to that case. There may be very similar cases where there are ongoing legal proceedings, and as such, there is a risk that these are sub judice. With that caveat, Cabinet Secretary, I don't know if you want to answer the first part of the question and leave the other one behind.
Well, I thank Dave Stewart, and I think his general thrust was the role that the limited duration tenancies can play in this debate. There has, of course, been an increase in the number of limited duration tenancies over the years since they were first introduced and subsequently changed by this government. Therefore, the statistics, for instance, show that in 2008 there was 509 short limited duration tenancies. Now there's 834 in terms of 2014 statistics. In terms of the limited duration tenancies, not the short ones, there was 205 in 2008 and 528 in 2014. So there's been increases. However, at the same time, there has been a decline in the amount of let land in Scotland. Therefore, I think the proposals from the review group in terms of more flexibility with the limited duration tenancies, also the potential for 35-year limited duration tenancies, I think will give more security to tenants, and also some of the circumstances being proposed around them will make them more attractive, and I hope will lead to more let land in Scotland over time.
Dave Thompson, followed by Graham Pearson.
I too welcome the report and the statement by the Cabinet Secretary, and I would just like to ask the Cabinet Secretary that, along with recommendation 13, which will improve family assignation rights, allowing a farmer to assign the farm in his or her lifetime for secure 91 Act tenancies, we also have recommendation 15, which makes provision to enable any secure 1991 Act tenant to convert the tenancy into a new long-duration modern LDT with a minimum term of 35 years, and then be able to transfer that tenancy to anyone in the open market value. Now, that's as opposed to open assignation on the market itself. And I just wonder if the Cabinet Secretary believes that the combination of recommendations 13 and 15 will actually, or do actually, strike the right balance in relation to this matter.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. And Dave Thompson raises issues which relate to some of the fundamental objectives of the review group. Both the proposals referred to by Dave Thompson in relation to 1991 tenancies relate to the review group's hope that we can find ways to both keep land in tenancy in Scotland, for the reasons I've outlined earlier, and secondly, provide a dignified exit route for older farmers. There are some circumstances that were highlighted to the group, and this was a big concern for stakeholders, where a 1991 tenancy or tenant perhaps did not have a successor that they could assign to under current legislation. Therefore, widening that will increase the chances of that tenancy staying within the system. And secondly, if there were not any successors, even with the broader flexibility under legislation that we're proposing from the review group, then they could have a dignified exit by converting the 1991 tenancy to a long-term limited duration tenancy, and having that available in the open market to make it available for new entrants would allow an older farmer with no successor to retire with dignity. And of course, at the moment, it's been highlighted to the group, the lack of that flexibility is perhaps holding up opportunities for new entrants because the older farmers got nowhere to go. And therefore, this is hopefully one solution to addressing some of these fundamental problems.
Graham Pearson, followed by Michael Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the proposals, particularly for tenancy apprenticeships and the new vehicles proposed to enable tenants to take on a greater share of fixed equipment, etc. The review examined elements that make it extremely difficult for tenant farmers to access financial support from banks and other sources in pursuit of development plans, as well as that additional challenge facing tenant farmers in relation to their own, often substantial investments. Can the Minister give any further detail about what steps he thinks the Government may take in the future to deal with these specific issues, and what kind of timescales?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I think this is one of the most exciting proposals from the review group, because quite clearly, as Graham Pearson quite rightly highlights, as agriculture has been so capitalised over the last few decades, it's very, very expensive to get your own farm, and because there's not as many leases available, clearly you're locked out of agriculture, even though you want to start working land producing food. So we have to open up opportunities, and I think the apprenticeship lease arrangement is an exciting way forward, because it will allow new entrants to work with an existing farmer, get to know the ropes, have a stake in the farm, and of course over time hopefully then take over the lease. And also that will be attractive, I believe, hopefully to many new entrants, because it will be a new vehicle that's available to get into farming. So I think this is going to be one of the most exciting things. I think it's quite right we should back that up with support from government. We have existing schemes to help new entrants, so we'll have to work over the coming months a good package of linking all these various support mechanisms together to make it really attractive for young people, young men and women, to take up a career in agriculture.
Michael Russell, followed by Jim Hume.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the warm welcome that this report will receive from many of my constituents, particularly on some of the islands, the Argyll Islands, who have had considerable difficulties in maintaining relationships with their landlord. This is not simply about relationships, however, it's also to do with the nature of the community and the nature of the economic and social fragility of the area in which they live. The key to this, as the Cabinet Secretary will also know, is section 8.7 of the report and recommendation 22. Will the Cabinet Secretary confirm that he intends to bring forward amendments or legislation within the Land Reform Bill that will deal with the issue of ministerial intervention, or does he expect this to be undertaken by the committee, or will there be a wider consultation to ensure that ministerial intervention can take place in areas of economic and social fragility, which certainly does define some of the areas within my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Michael Russell, given his constituency experience, particularly in some of his island communities, will be very familiar with the rationale behind some of the recommendations by the review group. Clearly, as he quite rightly says, there's a very clear interaction between tenant farming and wider community interest and the health of the wider community, particularly in the more rural parts of Scotland. The aim of the land reform consultation at the moment is to find mechanisms for ministers to intervene to address that, where sustainable development is being frustrated by the actions of particular landowners. And we have got to wait for the closure of the consultation, which is the 10th of February, to hear people's views. But I just say to Michael Russell at this stage that we are ambitious as far as this is concerned. But of course, my job now as the chair of this review group is to speak to my colleagues in government and work through how we can implement some of these recommendations, and particularly in terms of this particular question, in conjunction with the land reform consultation. So a lot of good work will take place, and I would urge the committee to have its say as well, and to look at this and work with stakeholders, wider society and the government to make sure we get this right.
I am mindful that I have yet another 5 members who wish to ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary. I do have some time in hand over all of the debates this afternoon, so I intend to make progress. But can I just say to the remaining 5, if you do want to get in, you need to keep it short. Jim Hume, followed by Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the Government commit to provide security for tenants in the interim period between the report being published today and recommendations being put down in law?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly there is legislation in place at the moment that gives a degree of security for existing tenants in Scotland, and we, throughout the whole of the review group's work, have worked very closely with all stakeholders, tenants, landlords, the other players in the sector, and I hope that, given that I believe the recommendations are reasonable, yes, they're ambitious and radical, but they're reasonable, and I believe we all share the same outcome for Scottish agriculture in this country, that everyone will rally behind the report and the recommendations. They might not agree 100% with every single thing in the report, but I think the spirit of what the review group are trying to achieve should be shared by all stakeholders, and I would ask them all, hopefully, to get behind that and respect it.
Angus MacDonald, followed by Cara Hilton.
I too welcome the final report, which is indeed bold and radical. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what progress has been made towards increasing the proportion of land available for tenant farming since the introduction of the Agricultural Holdings Amendment Act came into force?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I gave some indication that there has been an increase in the short limited duration tenancies and the limited duration tenancies, and that is also since we introduced some flexibility a few years ago in terms of what this government has done. However, there has been an overall decline in the amount of let land in Scotland, and therefore that just reinforces the need for some of the recommendations in this report. So there's a lot of work still to be done.
Cara Hilton, followed by Graham Day.
The interim report pointed out that far more people who have no direct involvement in farming or in the wider rural economy are now able to live in the countryside, and it was suggested that this presents a significant commercial opportunity for landowners. Many tenants feel that this has made access to farms that include affordable housing on-site or nearby extremely difficult, and I'd be interested to know more about how the Scottish Government intends to address this important issue.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. It's a very important issue that Cara Hilton raises. Firstly, in terms of affordable housing, there are some recommendations and references in the report to planning policy and ensuring that there's perhaps housing opportunities available for farmers, or in case of retiring farmers for them as well, to give an incentive. And in terms of the wider issue over life in the countryside and the capitalisation of farming and the cost of land, which is the heart, I think, of the question, there are references to the need for tax measures potentially in the report as well. We've just had the statement on the Smith Commission before this, and we're going to have very limited say over some of those issues raised in the report in terms of perhaps tax changes that may have to be looked at. So I hope the UK Government are paying attention to this report as much as the Scottish Government, and I hope that the Smith Commission is just the beginning of new powers coming to this Parliament so we can address these issues for ourselves.
Graham Day, then finally Jean Urquhart.
Thank you. With regard to the opportunity for 91 tenants to apply to the Land Court to force the sale of the holdings, as the CabSec knows, turning to the Land Court can be a lengthy and expensive business. Can I ask him if consideration can be given to how we avoid protracted and costly cases in such circumstances?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that's a good issue that Graham Day raises. It's something I'm wanting to explore further in terms of the recommendation and where we take that. Often, of course, the cost of using the Land Court is not the Land Court fees, it's the cost of legal representation and how long the case may go on for that influences the overall bill. So I think there are some issues to be looked at there, accept that, and we'll have to do that as we take forward the recommendations.
Jean Urquhart.
Thank you. A couple of points have been answered. Thanks for that, Cabinet Secretary. Now, I wonder, just leading on from the right to buy, if a landowner is keen to sell a farm but not for farming, not to continue the practice of farming on it, what right then would the tenant farmer have if he was actually keen to buy it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the recommendations extend the existing preemptive right to buy to becoming an automatic registration for the preemptive right to buy. So in the circumstances outlined by Jean Urquhart, the farmer would have the opportunity to buy the farm. Not only that, the review group's recommendations introduce some other circumstances that may trigger the right to buy in terms of the preemption, and hopefully, these will deliver the benefits we want to see as well in the future.
Thank you. That ends the statement by the Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead on the Agriculture Holdings Review Group report. We now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 12154 in the name of Fergus Ewing on partnership